So to become an elite level fighter, it takes years of dedication and hard work. I think that's one reason why people find combat sports so motivating. But I work in the MMA gym, and from what I see and the stories I've heard, I could tell you just 1 hour of training a week will change your life. For example, I have a friend at the gym I work at who's your standard tech bro, not a crazy athlete or anything like that, but he just has one private pad lesson a week and he'll lift some weights on the other days. But one time he went out drinking with someone else from the gym, and I heard from his friend that some guy was giving his friend shit while they were out. And in case you're someone younger, anytime there's a combination of girls and alcohol, there will be dickheads. And a lot of people aren't dickheads when they're sober, but the environment turns them into dickheads. But anyways, yeah, some guy was giving his friend shit, so he backed up his friend and they ended up getting into it, and he actually ended up knocking the dude out. And of course, violence is bad, and it's best to avoid it, because the guy giving his friend shit could have had a knife or something like that, or he himself could have ended up getting arrested. But at the same time, how awesome must that have felt to be able to defend your friend and just look like the man in front of all your boys? And another thing you should know is that the guy he KO'd was actually bigger than him, according to his friend that also trains at the gym. Because even if you never spar or compete, like this guy, he only spars like once every 3 weeks just for fun and shits and giggles. But he doesn't spar often or consistently. It's just once you know how to twist your hips when you punch, you basically have a club attached to your body. Whereas when I teach the beginners class, even when I hold pads for big bodybuilders, if they're arm punching or not using their hips, their punches will still obviously hurt, but it's nowhere near the level of power someone has when they actually know how to punch. And on top of this, if you know super basic stuff like how to keep your chin tucked when you're fighting, or how to cover your chin with your shoulders when you punch so you're safe, and understand super basic footwork patterns like moving out the way if someone's coming forward or just taking a step back and then punching them, you'll be able to keep yourself relatively safe also. And of course it doesn't guarantee you'll win the fight, because if you watch UFC you know anything could happen, but it does stack the odds in your favor. And something you should know about the guy in this story is that he's literally the nicest dude. And just for a thought experiment, do you think if he was constantly worried about getting beat up, he would be as nice? Because personally, I don't think he would. From my experiences, anytime I've met someone who was kind of an asshole, from what I don't think there was any malicious intent or they were doing it on purpose. I feel like they're usually just scared in some way, or they have an ego that they're worried about getting damaged. That's why when you go into a martial arts gym, one of the first things you'll notice is how nice everyone is there. Of course, it sounds weird saying that learning a skill of how to hurt people makes you a warmer and more chill person, but it actually does. But it's a similar situation with my brother. He only trains BJJ like twice a week, but when I'm with him, I feel very comfortable, because I know if I'm with him and I get into it with someone and I start to get beat up for whatever reason, I know at the very least he can just go up behind them and put them in a rear naked choke, which, like learning how to use your hips when you punch, doesn't take much training to learn how to do. Whereas if I'm with one of my friends that don't train, I might be a little bit more nervous when we're walking through SF, or if we're out in Las Vegas or anything like that. So naturally, when I'm with someone who knows some basic fundamentals of fighting, I feel a tiny bit safer and more comfortable. Now, this being said, I do have to tell a story about someone else from the gym. So a while ago, there was a teenager who signed up for the gym, and he's honestly a pretty chill guy. Like, I've never had a problem with him, and he's always been respectful. But after about 2 months of training, he was driving home at night, and for whatever reason, him and the car filled with 5 dudes started road raging at each other, and they decided to meet up at the park and fight. And basically, from what I've heard, he was fighting one of the dudes. I assumed the driver, that'd make the most sense. But yeah, they were fighting, and then he landed a punch or two, which would make sense because he's been training martial arts for 2 months by this point. But then he decided to throw a teep, and a quick rule of thumb is that you should never throw a kick during a street fight, just in case you slip. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I feel like that's just a good guideline to follow. But yeah, they were on grass, so he slipped, and when he slipped, the other dudes just decided to hop in and beat the shit out of him. And I don't know if this is the exact story, because everyone knows things always get changed when they're passed around. But I saw a picture of his face afterwards, and he got fucked up pretty badly. I'm talking his face was covered in blood, and his lip was split open. And he also wears braces, so I assume the inside of his mouth was fucked up too. And just so you know, he ended up being okay. He came back to the gym a month later after he healed up. And hindsight 2020, it was probably a good life lesson for him. And also anyone else who hears his story. I definitely took something from it. But at the same time, you gotta be smart. Like if just one of those 5 dudes was having a slightly worse day and they were a tiny bit more pissed off, he literally could have gone beaten to death, which is pretty scary to think about. So yeah, basically, the first story I told you was to show you the wings you get when you learn some basic fundamentals of fighting. But this story was to tell you what happens when you fly a little bit too close to the sun. But if you're not part of one right now, but you're interested in joining an MMA gym, here's a step-by-step guide on how to. And I also tell you some unspoken rules about combat sports gyms that I've learned from working in one, and just from training myself. And with this channel, my goal is to help athletes and martial artists with their goals. So if it sounds like this channel will help you, make sure to subscribe. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.